Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Voices in the Canopy by Fractal Wizard. This is the story of an experience I had in Cradle Mountain National Park in Tasmania, Australia, in my early teens. Despite causing no physical injury, it's haunted me into adulthood. I grew up in a family of avid hikers, both my mother a botanist and my father a biologist for the University of Tasmania, would regularly visit the deepest wilderness areas of Tasmania during their field studies. These trips were disguised as camping and hiking adventures for the family. I never minded, as I was just as passionate about the outdoors as they were, even from a young age. Keyword being was, as after what I went through, even 20+ years later, I refused to return there. We lived on a property a short driving distance from Lake St. Clair, a popular tourist destination. This was the only place my parents would allow me to camp and experience the wilderness alone, as long as I brought my German Shepherd with me. He was a former police dog and very well trained. At 12 or 13 years old, I didn't mind. It felt like my own little slice of freedom and my own little slice of wilderness, despite being surrounded by people. But it was easy to ignore them. As I got older and more brazen, I found myself hounding my parents to let me take my quad bike deeper into the park to camp, to test my own abilities, and prove to them that I was capable of doing so, and that I wasn't a little kid anymore. It was that overconfidence that led me to the situation that's caused me this trauma. I was 15 at the time of the experience, at the age where I thought I was invincible, that I knew all there was to know and was untouchable. After asking my parents for what felt like an uncountable number of times and being told no just as many times, I'd had enough and decided to just go. I told my parents that I and a few friends were going to the lake to camp and do some fishing over the weekend. Instead, I took my tent, my quad, and headed into the reserve. I left just after sunrise to maximize daylight and to make it as far in as I felt comfortable. Once arriving, I set up camp, had some food, and decided to go for an exploration. I knew of a spot nearby with a gorgeous rock face where fossils had been found in the past, so I thought I'd try my luck. Shortly into the walk, I realized I'd been turned around and had no idea where I was anymore. At the time, I didn't see that as much of a big deal, as I had a compass and knew that if I headed south, it would take me back to the lake and I could walk from there. However, by this time, it was getting late in the afternoon. So stupidly, I decided to try my chances and make it back to my camp and quad bike so I wasn't walking back to camp from the lake in the dark. Big mistake. It was about 4:30 and the sun had begun to dip below the tree line, casting dark shadows across my walking path. That's when the forest went silent. And when I say silent, I mean silent. No wind, no birds, no forest sounds at all, which made my heart rate skyrocket. It was getting dark and the silence was suffocating. I just wanted to get back to my camp, light a fire, eat some snacks, and spend my night watching nature's television until I fell asleep. From every direction, I would hear the sound of twigs cracking and something moving in the canopy above me. I mean, no big deal, probably birds or other small animals, I thought. But then, as clear as day, "Hey, come here." At first, I felt relieved as I thought someone along the trails had seen me, noticed I was a bit disheveled and wanted to help. But looking around, I didn't see anyone. Then it happened again, but behind me this time. The same voice, but I noticed it was coming from up in the trees. I responded, "I can't see you, where are you?" and asked for some help because I thought I just couldn't see the person calling out. But then the voice came again, from my left this time. And that's when I decided to run. I took off into the brush and ran for a good 2 minutes before I stopped to catch my breath and look at my compass to start making my way towards the lake. I was terrified, but felt I had covered enough distance that I wasn't in any immediate danger. But seconds after checking my compass and starting to walk, I heard the voice again. "Hey, come here." But this time, it was right behind me. I spun around and saw absolutely nothing, so I began sprinting again and didn't stop. The last thing I heard before bursting out of the trees onto the lakefront was the most evil, demonic laugh I have ever heard. It sounded like 3 people laughing at once, and I immediately called my parents to come and get me, told them what I had done and what happened, but they were more focused on my disobedience than my experience. The moment they picked me up was the first time that I felt relief, and I cried the entire drive home. I didn't sleep properly for days. My dad went and picked up my quad and tidied up my camp. Since that day, I haven't stepped foot away from the lake. If anyone has had an experience like this, I'd love to hear it, because it took my passion from me. I miss being out away from society, but I can't bring myself to do it. Creepy Stalker by the Leviathan. This happened to me about 6 years ago. I was doing my usual routine of walking around town for a few hours as I enjoyed walking, and I was getting my steps in for the day. I'd always start from my house, walk around town for a few hours, then turn around and head back home. I'd always go walking around noon or an hour or two later at the latest. My walks would start at 11 a.m. at the earliest or 2 p.m. at the latest. This day in particular, I had a bunch of things to do, so I was unable to go out walking before noon. I'd eventually finished up everything that I needed to do, but it was already in the mid to late afternoon. I checked the time, and it was almost 3. I debated whether or not I should go walking or if I should go tomorrow instead, since I had nothing going on the next day. But I said fuck it and decided to go for my walk. But I told myself that I had to cut it short since I didn't want to be out after sunset, since it would get pretty cold at night. I got dressed and headed out to get my walk in for the day, and fast forward almost 3 hours later, I looked at my phone to check the time, saw that it was almost 6, and started to make my way back home. I had a bit of a problem. I was about 6 miles away from my house, and it would take me about an hour and a half or more to get there. The sun had fully gone down, and there was only a faint orange glow in the sky. The night sky had begun to take over, and the air was turning cold. I began to make my way home, and had picked up the pace as I didn't want to be outside when it got very cold. I was about 2 miles away from my home and thought I was in the clear. I was wrong. I passed by a convenience store, and I noticed a man sitting on the side of the building smoking a cigarette. The man looked to be in his early to mid-30s, wore a black hoodie, black pants, and black shoes. I saw him turn his head towards me, and he gave me a blank stare. I didn't think anything of it, and just ignored him. I turned around a few moments later, and saw that he had gotten up from his spot and was walking in the same direction I was going. I kept checking behind me every so often to see if he would turn down another street, but he never did. After several minutes of him walking the same way as me, I heard the man start yelling, "Hey!" He then started saying other stuff to try to get my attention, which I ignored. Right after that, I heard him yell, "What the fuck?" at me in an angry tone. I sped up and didn't dare to look back at that point. I texted my dad and explained that there was a creepy guy following me and how he was also yelling at me. My dad replied asking me how far away I was, and I said less than a mile, and he replied back to keep walking, don't worry, and that he was coming to get me in the next few minutes. I turned behind me to see if the man was still following, as he had stopped yelling, and unfortunately he was still there. I was about 3/4 of a mile away from my house, and I thought about just running, But at the same time, I didn't want this guy to follow me and find out where I lived. I was about to turn down the street I lived on when something told me not to do that. I texted my dad and told him that I had passed the street to go the other way, which he replied with an okay. I kept going forward, passing the street, when all of a sudden I heard some kind of frantic noise. I turned around only to see, to my horror, that the guy had put his hood up and was sprinting straight towards me. Without hesitation, I bolted straight ahead and across the street, and I kept running for what felt like hours until I saw a pair of headlights coming down the street. I waved my arms like a madman, hoping they would see me, and thankfully they did and the car stopped. I got a little closer to it and saw that it was my dad. I looked behind me only to see that the man who had been chasing me had somehow disappeared. I got in the car and explained everything to my dad, and he said that he was going to drive down the street to see if he could find the guy and would confront him. We drove down the street and didn't see anyone walking on the sidewalk or hiding in the bushes. There was no sign of anyone being out there as the streets were completely empty. From that day on, I have not gone out walking after 2 p.m. And now I carry a pocket knife with me whenever I go out walking for my own safety and protection. I don't know what that man would have done to me had he caught me, and I don't think I ever want to know. My Kids and the Ghost, submitted by Mark. I've had experiences with spirits all my life, and so has my mother and other members of my family. I did some research into this, and I probably have some empath abilities and probably some other ones too. I just can't put my finger on them all, nor have I developed them, and I don't really know where to begin with this. I have 2 kids, a 4.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and a non-believer wife. At least she won't admit to believing. We'd experienced a lot of strange things in the house, and I had had the house blessed at least 3 times. Blessed it myself with improvement in the activity each time to the point where there was just a level of baseline activity that was tolerable, such as seeing things in the corner of your eye and having that feeling of being watched. And it always happened in waves. What prompted me to share this is that I wanted to see if anyone has ever had any experience with this, because the activity is starting to get stranger. A few months ago, my dog Reggie, a 150-pound Rottweiler, who's as sweet as could be, and 7 years old, got very sick at my parents' house. He was a little older, and it appeared my parents' neighbor had poisoned him. He got so sick that he couldn't move, and the vet diagnosed him with diabetes and pancreatitis at first. He didn't improve with treatment, and I had to put him to sleep. Prior to that, I had gotten a tox screen on him and found that he had high levels of arsenic and antifreeze in him. I can't even express how bad that had been for me, and worst of all, I didn't have proof the neighbor did it. But anyway, when Reggie was sick, my kids say they saw him walking around the house. He wasn't even at our house at the time. And my oldest son was convinced there was a black dog hiding in the closet in the sunroom of our house. He took me to look, and I couldn't see anything, but I did feel like I was being watched and did feel a presence. I didn't acknowledge it, and I asked him if it was Reggie. My son said no, just a black dog. Another time, he saw Reggie in our TV room and said it was Reggie. So the black dog freaked me out, because he could tell the difference between Reggie the Rottweiler and some other random black dog. Also, the black dog was in the sunroom. My other son claims to have also seen the black dog. It happens on occasion, but there hasn't been a black dog sighting for a few months. Fast forward to the past few weeks. Out of nowhere, this putrid smell started to come out of the sunroom. It was a smell like rotting flesh, and it has happened before but disappeared, but this time it was right in our faces. It was so strong we would gag if we went into the room. I looked all around and couldn't find a source for the smell. I looked outside and there was nothing there either, I even looked up in the rafters, but there was nothing. I'm a physician, and I know what rotting flesh smells like. And this was flesh that was so right in your face. So something was big and dead, or it was right there. Oddly enough, the smell would move from one corner of the room to another. And as mysteriously as the smell came, after a day or so, it disappeared. I've had that happen at my house before, and we couldn't explain it then either. We also smelled the smell of incense that was used in the blessings in various areas around there, almost as if whatever this was mocking us. The strange thing is that my kids can play there when the smell is around and not be bothered by it one bit, like that as if they don't smell it. Only my wife and I do. What bothers me even more now is that my mother, who is with the boys while my wife and I are at work, was bringing my kids home from the library one day, and my oldest said, "I don't want to go home. It's haunted." My little one then piped up, "Yeah, it's a demon." I have never talked to my kids about anything paranormal going on in the house, and have never used the terms haunted or demon around them. I don't even watch the paranormal shows with them around, so I don't know how they came up with that. More troubling, my 2.5-year-old keeps joking and saying that we're going to die over and over. And this kid isn't afraid of anything, but my oldest son has some issues with speech and sensory issues. Small noises scare him, and he's easily scared, but is otherwise a normal kid. My kids don't act out, and they don't interact with anyone who is or isn't there. What I've also noticed is that my wife and I have been fighting a lot lately, and it's usually over stupid things. We'd come home from work and stupid things would be said, or there was a feeling of hopelessness, in that this was the same old routine day after day. I'm sure some of it's just the parenting blues and we're both tired, but it was always happening when my kids were talking about this haunting and a demon. In terms of what I've seen and experienced, I have some really vivid and strange dreams, ranging from being lost in a field that I've been in before, to things that I can't remember, but wake up remembering. I occasionally see shadows out of the corner of my eye, and sometimes orbs or shadows right in front of me. I've sat in that sunroom by myself and kind of spaced out, but I wouldn't call it formal meditation. And I've always had this weird feeling or thought in my head that's popped up that people were playing with a Ouija board in that sunroom at one time. Again, just a weird thought. I'm not really sure what it means. At this point, I'm not quite sure what I should do. Part of me wants to invest in some paranormal detection gear, like EMF detectors, and investigate things on my own. Another part of me wants to try another blessing. But what frightens me at this point is that my kids see this and kind of know finally that something is going on. The Woman and the Uber by Stick Caregiver. 4 years back, I had to move from a major East Coast city in the U.S. to London for work. I had spent over 7 years in this city and was emotionally jolted by the move, as I was in a 3-year relationship and was living happily with my then girlfriend. On my last day there, I went with my girlfriend to my favorite sunset spot in the city. It felt like a fitting end to my chapter there, as my girlfriend and I had spent countless evenings walking there, and that spot was truly my happy place. As the sun dipped under the horizon, my girlfriend and I decided to get an Uber back home to spend our last night in our apartment that we had so painstakingly put together. As I ordered the Uber, I realized that I had accidentally ordered it a few blocks away, and it was now a few minutes away. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and started running towards the Uber. While we were running, I noticed that another woman, short, in her early 30s and well put together, was also running behind us. While running, I joked to my girlfriend that she might have also ordered an Uber in the wrong spot. However, as we passed a couple of intersections, we were still unable to lose her. At the next intersection, the moment the light went green, I tightly gripped my girlfriend's hand to prevent her from sprinting. The woman took 2 steps ahead and realized that we weren't moving. As she turned back to us, I asked her, "What do you want?" She responded almost immediately that she needed to get in the Uber with us because her life was in danger. Her hand was in her purse and she was carrying a bag from T-Mobile in her other hand. Knowing that my girlfriend was going to be alone in that house for a few days after I left, I refused her request. I told her that I'd be happy to walk her to a safe space or even a police station if needed, but there was no way in hell she was finding out where my girlfriend lived. The woman kept on pleading, noting that her life was in danger and everyone was trying to get her. And all the while she was looking around for someone in an extremely jerky way. I stood there on the side of the road for a good 10 minutes, refusing her request to come in the Uber with us. To make it crystal clear that she was not coming with us, I even canceled the Uber I had ordered right in front of her. Her hand in her purse and the fact that my girlfriend was going to be alone meant that I was in no mood to try my luck. After 10 minutes or so, the woman agreed to get herself an Uber on my phone, and I asked for her number to check in on her once she arrived, and she removed a new iPhone box with a Post-it note from her T-Mobile bag and read the number from the Post-it. This was the only time her hand came out of her purse. She slid it right back in after she had read the number out to me. Ultimately, she put her location on a random suburban street by the woods, and I walked her to the Uber. After getting a notification that she had reached it, I dropped her a message to ask her if she was okay, and I didn't hear anything in return. What could explain this strange interaction? Was it some sort of a scam? What was she trying to achieve? Was I being too hard on her? I was just filled with emotions, and most of all, did not want to put my girlfriend in danger. Almost Kidnapped at the Adult Store by Fit Count. This happened approximately 10 years ago, in 2015 or 2016. I was living with someone at the time who worked an opposite schedule as me. He worked the graveyard shift and I worked during the day. So when I was getting up to get ready to leave for work, he was just coming home. On nights during the week, I obviously would be at home by myself. One night, I was feeling especially lonely, and my favorite toy unfortunately had broke and died. So I decided to drive downtown to the 24-hour adult store to buy another one. The town I live in is a mid-sized suburban town, filled with mostly residential areas. The main downtown area was essentially one small area on the way to the freeway. My apartment was about 10 minutes away. I pulled into the parking lot behind the adult store, and the parking lot was dark. It had multiple entries all around that led to bars and restaurants, as well as the store. After parking my car, I walked towards the entrance of the store, which was on the street. But to do so, I had to walk towards the driveway I came in to park. Upon walking to the entrance, I noticed a man standing by himself smoking a cigarette. It was 1 a.m., and it was not normal to see only one person standing by themselves. But I figured he was one of the patrons from one of the bars on the block taking a cigarette break. As I walked past him, he said, "Hi," to which I responded with a quiet, "Hi," but I didn't make eye contact with him. Upon passing him, I had a better look at his appearance. He had a shaved head, wore a long white t-shirt with shorts hanging past his knees. He had on a pair of sneakers accompanied with some tube socks that covered his shins. I mean, it's not unusual to see that kind of outfit in my town, but I was more concerned that he was sitting by himself and instantly took an interest in me as I walked past him. After passing him and continuing to walk to the store, I saw out of the corner of my eye the man who proceeded to follow behind me. And when I say follow, I don't mean he coincidentally was walking behind me. He immediately followed right behind as soon as I passed him, making a point to maintain the same walking speed. I didn't know this man's intentions, but a man by himself that late at night is a recipe for trouble. As I looked down the dark and empty street, I weighed out my options of where to go, and initially I thought, keep walking so he doesn't know you're going to the adult store. But since it was 1 a.m. and there was no one on the street, I thought that would be more dangerous. Then I thought, just go to one of the bars, but then I thought that would give him an easier introduction to approach me. So I realized my best bet was to continue into the store where I knew it was well lit and people would be there to see me. I proceeded to shop for what I went there for, and the man entered the store behind me, but hung out at the front so as not to look like he was following me around. He wasn't even pretending to shop. He literally just sat at the front, waiting. As I was shopping, I heard the man make a "s" sound, to which I ignored. He wasn't getting the message. He continued making the "s" sound as I continued to shop without noticing. Eventually, I walked up to the cashier who was completely oblivious to what was going on. I tried to whisper to the cashier, "Do you know that man? Does he work here?" The cashier asked me to repeat what I was saying. I asked again, but still spoke in a quiet voice. Not understanding my attempt to be discreet, the cashier responded, "I can't hear you. Say it again." At that point, I felt my cover had been blown. So in a more normal tone, I told the cashier the man in the front had followed me in from outside and wouldn't leave me alone. I then explained my car was parked in the lot behind the store and I didn't feel comfortable going to my car. The cashier said, "Okay." The cash wrap area was an enclosed square-shaped counter to maintain distance between the staff and the customers. So the cashier walked out to the front by where the man was and from behind the counter told the man to leave. He then came back and assured me that he had told the man to go away. Though the man did not, in fact, go away. He continued to stay. Given that I didn't want him to follow me to my car, I stayed in the store and pretended like I was still shopping, even though I had already found what I went there for. Every once in a while, I would occasionally glance to the front to see if the man was still there. He was. I kept going up to the cashier explaining that the man hadn't left. So we went back up to the front to talk to him, and I heard the cashier say, "Enough already. Leave the store." While he was doing that, I went to the far back end of the store to remain out of sight. By the time I circled back to the cashier, I noticed the man was no longer in the store, and the cashier said that he had repeatedly and more assertively told the man to leave. He said the man claimed he didn't understand English. The cashier then said that he'd pulled a baton he kept under the counter for protection, held it over the man's head and asked him, "Do you understand this?" And that's when the man finally left the store. I made my purchase, but was still worried about walking to my car even though I was parked in one of the first spaces when you went through the driveway. The cashier then pointed at a small TV behind him that had 4 angles of CCTV footage. He assured me the man was gone and if I saw him to come back into the store. He also said that he would be able to see me when I walked to my car. And even though I would have felt more comfortable with him walking me to my car, I understood he was by himself and couldn't leave the store unattended with customers. So after making my purchase, I quickly walked to my car. I always have my keys at the ready when walking to my car, so I promptly pressed unlock on my remote, got in, and placed my bag of purchases on the passenger seat, and proceeded to start the car. Once my car turned on, I took off the e-brake, put the car in reverse, and while putting on my seatbelt, I looked in my side view mirror to back out. It was at that point that I saw the same man in the side view mirror full-on speed walking right to my driver's side door. I was driving a Honda Accord at the time, and that model automatically locks all the doors when you take the car out of park. As soon as I saw him, I hit the gas and violently pulled out of my parking space. I pulled out so fast it startled him and it stopped him dead in his tracks. He was now standing right next to my driver's side door as I continued to pull out. I gave him the most serious dead stare I could because I know most predators play off the fear of their victims. The stare must have worked. As soon as he saw me pull out while staring at him, he turned his head back to the driveway entrance and proceeded to walk back to where he was standing. He had a look of defeat on his face. My face, however, was overcome with relief. I pulled out of the parking lot and took myself back home. I felt a bit of shame being by myself going out so late, and I told my boyfriend about the incident when he came home at 6 a.m. He concurred with me that going out that late by myself wasn't the smartest thing. I'm no longer with that person, but I still live in the same town, though I never leave my home for anything past 9 o'clock anymore. While the town I live in isn't the most dangerous, there are still enough crimes that occur here. It's also not considered the safest. So, to the man who decided to follow me at 1 in the morning with sinister intentions, let us not meet. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story you'd like to hear narrated on this channel of the podcast, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you've got a second and you like what you've heard, please give it a thumbs up, and maybe share a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support of this channel a step further, find a link to my Patreon page or consider purchasing some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. There's a link to my TeePublic storefront in the description too. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.